Drake spent the next 24 hours on the phone with lawyers, environmental consultants, and private investigators. He established a command center of sorts in Meghan's hospital room, his laptop balanced on a makeshift desk of stacked medical journals, his phone constantly pressed to his ear. Between calls, he read to Meghan from the books he'd had shipped from his New York apartment, her favorites, the one she'd left on his coffee table during the months when their relationship had been simple and new and untouched by corporate corruption. "The wound is the place where the light enters you," he read from Rumi, his voice hoarse from overuse. "That's what you told me once, remember? When I was frustrated about a deal that fell through. You said sometimes we need to break open to let something better in. I didn't understand what you meant. I think I'm starting to now." The nurses had stopped asking him to leave during shift changes. They brought him coffee without him requesting it, updated him on every subtle change in Meghan's condition, spoke to him with the gentle kindness reserved for those living in purgatory. One nurse, an older woman named Grace, had even brought him a prayer card. "I've been praying for her," Grace said, tucking the card into his hand. "And for you. Love like yours doesn't come around often. God sees it." Drake, who hadn't prayed since he was a child, found himself clutching the card during the darkest hours of night, his lips forming words he'd forgotten he knew, bargaining with a deity he wasn't sure he believed in. "Take everything else. Take the money, the company, the reputation. Just give her back to me." On the third day, the private investigator Drake had hired called with preliminary findings. "Mr. Brandon, I've spoken with several witnesses in Makani village. The official police report is incomplete, to put it mildly. Multiple people saw a black SUV following Miss Oliver's vehicle as she left the village. One witness, a teenager named Emmanuel, was close enough to see the SUV deliberately ram Miss Oliver's Land Rover before she went over the embankment." Drake's hand tightened around the phone. Did he report this to the police? He tried. They told him he must have been mistaken, that the darkness and rain confused him. They refused to take an official statement. Why? Emmanuel doesn't know for certain, but he overheard the police chief on the phone shortly after Miss Oliver's accident. The chief was assuring someone that the situation had been handled and that there would be no problems with the investigation. Drake closed his eyes, fighting the rage that threatened to overwhelm him. Someone bought off the local police. That would be my assessment, yes. I'm still tracking the SUV's ownership, but these things take time in this region. Records are incomplete. I don't care what it costs. Find out who was driving that vehicle and who ordered them to run Meghan off the road. Understood. There's one more thing, Mr. Brandon. Miss Oliver's personal belongings from the accident, they're still in police custody. According to protocol, they should have been released to next of kin or her emergency contact days ago. When I inquired about them, I was told the items was being processed. What items? Her phone, her wallet, and a leather satchel that was found in the vehicle. The files. Meghan's evidence. Get me a lawyer, Drake said. The best one in this country. I want those belongings released today. If the police refuse, I want them sued, their superiors contacted, and enough legal pressure applied that they have no choice but to comply. On it. Drake ended the call and sat in silence, staring at Meghan's peaceful face. Someone had tried to kill her. Someone connected to his company, someone who saw her investigation as enough of a threat to commit murder. And they'd almost succeeded. The rage he'd been suppressing since Dr. Okoye's first revelation about the suspicious nature of the accident finally broke free. Drake stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, his fists clenched so tightly his nails drew blood from his palms. I'm going to find them, he told Meghan, his voice shaking with fury. Whoever did this to you, whoever ordered this, I'm going to find them and I'm going to destroy them. Not just legally. Not just financially. I'm going to take everything they have and burn it to the ground. Behind him, the door opened. Drake turned, expecting a nurse, but found Daniel instead. We need to talk, Daniel said, his expression grim. I thought I made myself clear. The board called an emergency meeting. They're voting on whether to remove you as CEO. Drake barked a laugh devoid of humor. Let them try. Drake, I'm serious. You own 42% of the company. That's not a controlling share. If the board and major stockholders unite against you, they can force you out. And right now, with your behavior? My behavior? You mean caring about something other than quarterly profits? Yeah, I can see how that would concern them. Daniel stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. His voice dropped to something almost pleading. I've known you for 12 years. I was there when you started this company in a rented office with a maxed-out credit card and a dream. I've watched you build an empire through sheer force of will. Don't throw it all away now. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally seeing clearly. You're seeing through the eyes of grief and guilt. That woman. Say her name. Drake's voice was deadly quiet. If you're going to talk about her, say her name. Daniel sighed. Megan was passionate about her causes. But Drake, you can't save the world. You're a businessman, not a savior. These problems, poverty, pollution, corruption, they've existed for centuries. Your company didn't create them, and destroying your company won't solve them. But my company profited from them. And that makes me complicit. So what? You're going to bankrupt yourself in some grand gesture of atonement? You're going to sacrifice everything you've worked for because your girlfriend got hurt. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Drake moved before he thought, crossing the distance between them in 2 strides, backing Daniel against the wall. Get out. Get out before I forget we were ever friends. Daniel raised his hands in surrender, but his eyes held something Drake couldn't quite name. Something cold and calculating. I'm trying to protect you. Protect the company. Someone has to think rationally here. The company can burn for all I care. Now leave. Daniel left, but his parting glance at Megan's unconscious form carried a weight that Drake would only understand later, when all the pieces finally fell into place. Drake was alone again with Megan and the machines, but his mind raced with connections he'd been too grief-stricken to see before. Daniel's resistance to shutting down the subsidiary. His insistence that Drake return to New York. His dismissive attitude toward the investigation. The pieces were there, scattered like breadcrumbs, waiting for someone to follow them to their inevitable conclusion. He pulled out his phone and dialed the private investigator again. I need you to dig into Daniel Marks. My COO. Financial records, communications, travel history, everything. And I need it fast. Mr. Brandon, are you sure? If you're wrong about this. I'm not wrong. I should have seen it sooner, but I was too close. Daniel has been managing the subsidiary operations for the past 5 years. He signed off on every quarterly report. If there was illegal activity, he knew about it. And if Megan was about to expose it, he'd have the most to lose, the investigator finished. I'll start immediately. But Mr. Brandon, if your COO is involved in attempted murder, you need to be careful. If he suspects you're investigating him, let him suspect. I want him nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Drake ended the call and returned to Megan's bedside. He took her hand again, pressed it to his lips. I'm close, Meg. I'm so close to finding the truth. Just hold on a little longer. Please. As if in response, her fingers twitched. Actually twitched. Drake's heart stopped. Megan? Megan, can you hear me? He leaned closer, watching her face intently for any sign of consciousness. Her eyelids fluttered. The heart monitor's beeping accelerated slightly. Drake jabbed the call button. I need a doctor. Now. Dr. Okoye arrived within minutes, followed by 2 nurses. They examined Megan with professional efficiency while Drake hovered at the foot of the bed, hope and terror warring in his chest. Her responsiveness is increasing, Dr. Okoye said, shining a penlight into Megan's eyes. This is very encouraging, Mr. Brandon. She may be beginning to wake up. Maybe? What does that mean? Emerging from a coma is rarely a sudden event. It's often gradual, small signs of awareness that build over hours or days. What you witnessed could be the beginning of that process. Or it could be involuntary muscle movement. We won't know for certain until we see more consistent responses. Dr. Okoye placed a gentle hand on Drake's shoulder. But I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've learned to trust my instincts. I think she's fighting her way back to us. Over the next 6 hours, Megan showed increasing signs of consciousness. Her fingers moved more frequently. Her breathing pattern changed, becoming less mechanical. Once, when Drake whispered her name, her head turned slightly toward his voice. Drake never left her side. He talked to her constantly, telling her about the investigation, about the evidence he was gathering, about the changes he was implementing at Brandon Industries. He told her about the villages he'd contacted, the compensation packages his lawyers were drafting, the environmental cleanup he'd ordered to begin immediately. "You were right about everything," he said. "And I'm going to make sure the world knows it. Your work, your investigation, it won't be for nothing. I promise you that." Night fell again. Drake was reading aloud from her favorite Maya Angelou collection when his phone buzzed. The private investigator. "Mr. Brandon, you need to hear this. I accessed Daniel Marks's financial records, legally obtained through some creative research. 3 weeks ago, the same day Miss Oliver discovered the contamination reports, Marks received a wire transfer of $250,000 from an offshore account registered to a shell corporation. That corporation is owned by TechFlow Industries, the subsidiary responsible for the dumping." Drake's blood ran cold. He paid himself $250,000. That's how it appears. And there's more. I tracked the black SUV from the accident. It was rented by a man named Victor Petrov, a former military contractor with a rather unsavory reputation. Petrov flew into the country for days before Miss Oliver's accident. His plane ticket was purchased by Daniel Marks. Yes. And Petrov flew out the day after the accident. Back to Moscow, where conveniently, the United States has no extradition treaty. Over the next 6 hours, Megan showed increasing signs of consciousness. Her fingers moved more frequently. Her breathing pattern changed, becoming less mechanical. Once, when Drake whispered her name, her head turned slightly toward his voice. Drake never left her side. He talked to her constantly, telling her about the investigation, about the evidence he was gathering, about the changes he was implementing at Brandon Industries. He told her about the villages he'd contacted, the compensation packages his lawyers were drafting, the environmental cleanup he'd ordered to begin immediately. "You were right about everything," he said. "And I'm going to make sure the world knows it. Your work, your investigation, it won't be for nothing. I promise you that." Night fell again. Drake was reading aloud from her favorite Maya Angelou collection when his phone buzzed. The private investigator. "Mr. Brandon, you need to hear this. I accessed Daniel Marks's financial records, legally obtained through some creative research. 3 weeks ago, the same day Miss Oliver discovered the contamination reports, Marks received a wire transfer of $250,000 from an offshore account registered to a shell corporation. That corporation is owned by TechFlow Industries, the subsidiary responsible for the dumping." Drake's blood ran cold. He paid himself $250,000. That's how it appears. And there's more. I tracked the black SUV from the accident. It was rented by a man named Victor Petrov, a former military contractor with a rather unsavory reputation. Petrov flew into the country for days before Miss Oliver's accident. His plane ticket was purchased by Daniel Marks. Yes. And Petrov flew out the day after the accident. Back to Moscow, where conveniently, the United States has no extradition treaty. As dawn broke over the African landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, Drake heard a sound that made his heart stop. Drake. His name. Barely a whisper, rough with disuse, but unmistakably real. He spun toward the bed, Megan's eyes were open. Just slits, unfocused and confused, but open. She was looking at him. "Megan!" He rushed to her side, taking her hand carefully. "I'm here. I'm right here." "What?" Her voice was barely audible. "What happened?" "You were in an accident. But you're safe now. You're going to be okay." Her eyes struggled to focus. "The files. Did you get the files?" Even now, even waking from a week-long coma, her first thought was the investigation. Drake felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I'm handling it. Don't worry about that now. Just rest." "No." Despite her weakness, there was steel in her voice. "Important. Daniel. I saw him. Before the crash. He's in the village." Drake froze. "What?" Didn't make sense. Why would he be there? Her eyes drifted closed, the effort of staying conscious too much. "Megan, stay with me." "What do you mean you saw Daniel?" But she'd slipped back into sleep, not the terrible stillness of coma, but natural rest. Dr. Okoye, summoned by the nurses, performed a quick examination. "She's sleeping now, which is good. Her body needs to recover." "But Mr. Brandon, this is excellent news. She's conscious, responsive, speaking. These are all very positive signs." Drake barely heard him. His mind was replaying Megan's words. Daniel had been in the village. Daniel had been there personally, not sending a hired killer from thousands of miles away. He'd gone to Africa himself to handle the situation. Which meant it was personal. And which meant he was desperate. Drake made a decision. He kissed Megan's forehead gently, whispered "I'll be back soon," and left the hospital for the first time in 6 days. The village of Makani looked different in daylight. The rains had passed, leaving everything washed clean and green. Children played in the dusty streets, their laughter a stark contrast to the reason Drake was there. He found the village chief's house easily. It was the largest structure, though that wasn't saying much. The chief, an elderly man named Kofi, greeted Drake with cautious hospitality. "You are Megan's friend. She spoke of you." "I am. And I need your help." Over the next 2 hours, Drake recorded statements from everyone who'd seen Daniel Marks in the village. The accounts were consistent: an American in an expensive suit, asking questions about Megan, about her investigation, offering money for information. The village chief had refused to meet with him, suspicious of his motives. But others had talked. Someone had told Daniel where Megan was staying, when she planned to leave, which route she'd take. He wanted to know everything about her movements. Emmanuel, the teenager who'd witnessed the accident, told Drake. "I thought he was maybe police or something official. But after the crash, after the real police came and didn't care about what I saw, I realized he was something else." Drake showed Emmanuel a photo of Daniel on his phone. "Is this the man you saw?" "Yes. That's him. I'm sure of it." Drake recorded it all. Testimonies, photographs, timestamps. He contacted the rental company for the SUV and, through a combination of charm and financial incentive, obtained copies of the rental agreement showing Victor Petrov's signature, and the credit card payment from a Brandon Industries corporate account controlled by Daniel Marks. By the time Drake returned to the hospital that evening, he had everything he needed. Daniel had been sloppy, arrogant in his belief that he was untouchable. He'd left a trail of evidence that even the most expensive lawyers couldn't explain away. Megan was awake when he entered her room. Still weak, still wrapped in bandages, but her eyes were clear and focused in a way they hadn't been that morning. "You left," she said, her voice stronger now. "I had to gather evidence." "Against Daniel?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I knew something was wrong. When I found those reports, when I started digging deeper, there were too many layers of protection around the subsidiary's operations. Too much effort to hide the truth. It had to be someone high up in your company. I should have seen it." He was my friend, or I thought he was. I trusted him. He betrayed that trust. Meghan's hand found his. But Drake, you can't confront him alone. If he tried to kill me to protect himself, he'll do it again. I know. That's why I'm not going to confront him. I'm going to trap him. The plan was simple but required perfect timing. Drake flew back to New York the next day, leaving Meghan under the protection of private security guards he'd hired. She protested, wanting to be part of the confrontation, but she was still too weak to travel. Before he left, he'd held her close, careful of her injuries, and whispered against her hair, "When this is over, when Daniel is finished and the company is clean and everything is right again, marry me." She'd pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "You're asking me now? Like this?" "I'm asking you now because I've already wasted too much time. I love you, Meghan Oliver. I want to spend the rest of my life being the man you believe I can be." "Yes," she'd whispered. "Yes, of course yes. But Drake, come back to me. Promise me you'll come back." "I promise." Now, standing in the Brandon Industries conference room with the entire board assembled, Drake prepared to keep that promise. Daniel sat at the far end of the table, confident and composed, believing he was about to watch Drake's downfall. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Drake began. "I know there's been concern about my recent absence and decisions. I want to address those concerns directly." "We appreciate that, Drake," said Margaret Chen, the board chair. "We've all been worried about you. Before we begin, I'd like everyone to review these documents." Drake's assistant distributed folders to each board member. "These are environmental impact studies of our TechFlow subsidiary, along with evidence of illegal dumping, falsified reports, and bribery of local officials." Daniel's face remained neutral, but Drake saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "As you can see," Drake continued, "the contamination has been ongoing for 3 years. The health impacts on local communities are severe and well documented. I take full responsibility for not catching this sooner. But I'm here today to inform you that I'm shutting down all TechFlow operations immediately and establishing a $100 million fund for environmental cleanup and victim compensation." "Drake, that's financial suicide," one of the board members said. "The lawsuits alone will be nothing compared to what we deserve if we continue these operations. This stops now." Daniel spoke for the first time, his voice carefully modulated. "I understand you're upset about what happened to Miss Oliver. But destroying the company won't help her or anyone else. We need to approach this rationally." "Rationally?" Drake turned to face his COO directly. "Let's talk about rational decisions, Daniel. Like the rational decision to pay yourself $250,000 from TechFlow's offshore accounts 3 weeks ago." The room went silent. Daniel's composure cracked for just a second, a flash of panic in his eyes before the mask returned. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No? Then maybe you can explain these financial records." Drake pulled up a presentation on the large screen. "Wire transfers, shell corporations, all traced back to you. Or maybe you can explain why you were in Makani Village 2 days before Meghan's accident, asking questions about her investigation." "That's absurd. I've never been to Africa." "Really?" "Because I have 12 witnesses who identified you from photographs. I have credit card records showing you purchased a plane ticket. I have hotel records with your signature." Drake advanced toward Daniel, his voice rising. "And I have evidence that you hired Victor Petrov, a contract killer, to run Meghan off the road and make it look like an accident." "This is insane." Daniel stood abruptly. "You can't possibly believe." "I believe the evidence. And so will the police, the prosecutors, and the jury that's going to send you to prison for attempted murder." Daniel's face had gone pale. He looked around the room, seeing no allies, only shocked and disgusted faces. "You're making a mistake, Drake. You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm cleaning house." Board members, you all have copies of my formal complaint against Daniel Marks, along with the evidence I'll be turning over to the authorities. I'm also submitting his immediate termination and announcing my intention to cooperate fully with all criminal investigations. Drake, please. Daniel's voice had lost its confidence, taking on a pleading quality. We can work this out. It was just business. Nobody was supposed to get hurt, it was just supposed to scare her off. The room collectively gasped. Daniel realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. Just supposed to scare her off. Drake's voice was dangerously quiet. You hired someone to run the woman I love off a mountain road, and you thought that would just scare her. I didn't mean, I was trying to protect the company, protect all of us. She was going to destroy everything we'd built. No, Daniel. She was going to expose what we'd become. There's a difference. Drake pulled out his phone. I think you should know that this entire meeting has been live-streamed to the SEC, the FBI, and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. They've heard every word. The color drained completely from Daniel's face. He looked at the camera mounted in the corner of the room, the one he'd always assumed was just for corporate minutes, and understood the trap he'd walked into. You're welcome to leave now, Drake said. But I wouldn't recommend going far. I expect you'll have visitors very soon. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, then bolted for the door. He made it as far as the elevator before two FBI agents stepped out and placed him under arrest. Drake watched from the conference room as his former friend and COO was read his rights and led away in handcuffs. Margaret Chen approached Drake slowly. That was quite the performance. It wasn't a performance. It was justice. And the company? Drake, we're going to face lawsuits, investigations, massive financial losses. We're going to face the consequences of our actions. But we're going to do it honestly. No more cover-ups, no more dirty money. We're going to be the company Meghan believed we could be, or we're going to fail trying. Are you with me? Margaret looked around at the other board members. One by one, they nodded. We're with you, she said. God help us all, but we're with you. 2 months later, Drake stood in the hospital garden in Makani with Meghan at his side. She'd insisted on returning to Africa for her physical therapy, wanting to recover in the place where she'd almost died. The village had welcomed her back like a hero, the children bringing flowers and the elders offering prayers of thanksgiving. I heard Daniel's trial starts next week, Meghan said, her hand entwined with Drake's as they watched the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Yes. The prosecutor says they have enough evidence to put him away for 20 years minimum. Attempted murder, conspiracy, environmental crimes, the list goes on. Do you feel any satisfaction in that? Drake considered the question. No. Just sadness. He was my friend once, or I thought he was. I keep wondering if I miss signs, if I could have stopped this before. Before he tried to kill me. Meghan turned to face him. Drake, you can't blame yourself for his choices. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and he chose to do it anyway. That's on him, not you. I know. Intellectually, I know. But emotionally. He pulled her closer, careful of her still healing ribs. I almost lost you. That's going to haunt me for the rest of my life. But you didn't lose me. I'm right here. She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. And I'm not going anywhere. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the village came alive with evening activities. The sound of children playing, women singing as they prepared dinner, men gathering to discuss the day's events, the rhythms of life continuing as they always had and always would. The village chief told me something today, Meghan said. He said that sometimes the universe breaks us open so that we can grow into who we're meant to be. That suffering isn't punishment, it's transformation. Very philosophical. I think he's right, though. Look at what's changed. Brandon Industries is completely restructuring around sustainable and ethical practices. You've established scholarship funds for the children in affected villages. The cleanup is ahead of schedule. People are getting compensation, getting medical care, getting justice. None of that would have happened if. Don't. Drake's voice was sharp. Don't justify what happened to you as some necessary catalyst for change. You could have died, Megan. I could have lost you forever. But you didn't. And I'm choosing to believe that everything we went through, the pain, the fear, the fight, it all meant something. It changed us. It changed the world around us, even if just a little bit. Drake pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. She smelled like the hospital soap and the flowers the village children had given her, and something uniquely Megan, sunshine and determination and hope. I love you, he whispered. I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that. Good. Because you're stuck with me now. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. You proposed to me while I was in a coma, Drake. That's a binding contract. Actually, you were awake when I proposed. Barely. I'm pretty sure that doesn't count. Then let me propose properly. Drake dropped to one knee right there in the hospital garden, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, not the massive diamond he could easily afford, but a simple gold band engraved with a line from Rumi, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Megan Oliver, will you marry me? Will you continue to challenge me, infuriate me, inspire me, and make me want to be better than I ever thought I could be? Will you spend the rest of your life reminding me what actually matters? Tears streamed down Megan's face. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Is that a no? That's a yes, you impossible man. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her as the sun finally dipped below the horizon. In the village behind them, someone began to sing a traditional wedding song. Within moments, others joined in, their voices rising in celebration of love that had survived corruption, violence, and the space between consciousness and oblivion. 6 months later, Drake stood at the altar of a small church in New York, watching as Megan walked down the aisle toward him. She'd chosen to wear white with African print accents, a fusion of cultures that represented who they were together, two worlds that shouldn't have fit but somehow created something more beautiful than either could be alone. The church was filled with an unlikely congregation, board members and villagers, corporate executives and NGO workers, his mother, who'd eventually come around, and Megan's extended family who'd flown in from across the country. In the back row sat Grace, the nurse who'd prayed for them during those dark days in McInerney. The ceremony was simple but profound. They wrote their own vows. Drake promised to build with integrity, to lead with compassion, to never forget that people mattered more than profit. Megan promised to keep challenging him, to continue fighting for justice, to love him even when he was being impossibly stubborn. And I promise, she concluded, her voice thick with emotion, to always believe in the man you're becoming, not just the man you've been. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. At the reception, Drake's best man, his new COO, a woman named Sandra who'd helped implement the ethical restructuring, gave a toast. I've known Drake Brandon for 5 years. In that time, I've watched him build one of the most successful companies in the tech industry. But I've never seen him truly successful until he met Megan. She taught him that wealth without purpose is just accumulation, that power without responsibility is just tyranny, and that love without sacrifice is just sentiment. To Drake and Megan, may they continue to change the world, one difficult decision at a time. As the evening wore on and the dancing began, Drake pulled Megan onto the floor for their first dance as husband and wife. The DJ played their song, the one that had been playing during their first kiss, at that charity gala where she'd confronted him about his company's practices. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Megan asked, her head resting against his chest. Here? Dancing at our wedding? No. I thought you'd never speak to me again after that gala. I meant here, with Brandon Industries actually making a difference. With Daniel in prison. With clean water flowing in McInerney and 3 other villages. With scholarship programs and ethical supply chains and all of it. No, Drake admitted. I never imagined any of it. I was too focused on building an empire to think about what I was building it on. And now? Now I know that the real empire isn't made of money or power. It's made of moments like this. It's made of choosing right over easy, truth over convenience, love over fear. He spun her gently, then pulled her back. You changed my life, Megan Oliver, sorry, Megan Brandon. She laughed. I'm keeping Oliver, actually. Hyphenating. Megan Oliver Brandon. I earned that name fighting for what I believed in. I'm not giving it up. I wouldn't expect you to. They danced until the music slowed and the guests began to drift away, until it was just them and the remnants of celebration scattered across the ballroom. Drake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, intending to ignore it, but the notification made him smile. What is it? Megan asked. An alert from our foundation. The water purification system in Makani just went fully operational. The village now has access to clean water 24 hours a day. Megan's eyes filled with tears. We did it. You did it. I just provided the resources. No, Drake. We did it together. That's the point. That's what love does, it takes two incomplete people and makes them capable of things neither could do alone. Drake kissed his wife, his partner, his conscience, his second chance at becoming who he should have been all along. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of ambition and desire, of dreams pursued and fortunes made. But in this moment, in this room, none of that mattered. What mattered was the weight of her hand in his. What mattered was the promise they'd made, not just to each other, but to every life their choices would touch. What mattered was knowing that they'd been broken open by tragedy and had chosen to let the light pour through. The wound had become the place where the light entered. And the light had transformed everything. 5 years later, Drake stood on a stage in Geneva, accepting the Global Humanitarian Award on behalf of Brandon Industries. The company had become a model for ethical business practices, proving that profitability and responsibility weren't mutually exclusive. Their environmental cleanup efforts had expanded to 12 countries. Their scholarship program had sent 200 kids to college. Their sustainable technology had been adopted by competitors, creating industry-wide change. But Drake barely heard the applause or saw the cameras flashing. His eyes were fixed on Megan in the front row, holding their 3-year-old daughter, a little girl named Grace, after the nurse who'd prayed them through the darkest days. Beside them sat their son, David, just 6 months old and sleeping peacefully in Megan's arms. After the ceremony, a young journalist approached Drake for an interview. Mr. Brandon, 5 years ago you were known as a ruthless corporate raider. Now you're accepting humanitarian awards. What changed? Drake looked at his wife, his children, the life they'd built from the ashes of his old ambitions. I fell off a cliff, he said simply. And when I climbed back up, I discovered I'd been looking at the world upside down. Love has a way of correcting your perspective. That's quite poetic, Mr. Brandon. I learned from the best. That night, in their hotel room with the children asleep in the adjoining suite, Drake and Megan stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights spread out before them like fallen stars, each one representing a life, a story, a chance to make a difference. Do you ever think about that night? Megan asked. The accident. Every day. But not with fear anymore. With gratitude. Gratitude. That I got a second chance. That you survived. That we found our way to this, he gestured at the room behind them, at the sleeping children, at the life they'd created. All of this? Megan leaned into him. Daniel's parole hearing is next month. Drake nodded. He'd been notified. I know. Are you worried? No. The prosecutor says there's no chance he'll be released. He won't be eligible again for another 5 years minimum. But Drake, when he does eventually get out, what happens then? Then we do what we've always done. We choose forgiveness. We choose to believe people can change, because we changed. We give him the same second chance we gave ourselves. You're a better person than I am. No. I just learned from the best teacher in the world, a woman who never gave up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. They stood in silence, watching the world spin on, full of its sorrows and joys, its failures and triumphs. Somewhere out there, a child was drinking clean water for the first time. Somewhere, a village was celebrating the arrival of sustainable technology. Somewhere, someone was fighting for justice against impossible odds. And somewhere in New York, in the penthouse where Drake had once stood alone, the lights were off. He'd sold that apartment, donated the proceeds to Megan's foundation. They lived in Brooklyn now, in a brownstone with a garden where their children could play and Megan could grow the flowers she loved. "Ready to go home?" Drake asked. "Always," Megan replied. They turned from the balcony, from the glittering city and its seductive promises of power and glory, and walked back into the simple, perfect reality of their lives. 2 children sleeping peacefully. A marriage forged in fire and strengthened by truth. A love that had survived death, betrayal, and the long journey from who they were to who they'd become. The story that began with confrontation and ended with transformation. The story of a man who'd built an empire only to discover his true kingdom was measured in smiles, not stocks. In clean water, not corporate conquests. In the weight of his daughter's hand in his, not the weight of wealth in his accounts. This was the empire that mattered. This was the legacy worth leaving. And as Drake closed the door to their hotel room, shutting out the world and its endless noise, he heard Megan humming that old song from their wedding, the one about wounds and light and transformation. He joined her, their voices blending in harmony, singing softly so as not to wake their children. Singing of love that endured beyond consciousness, beyond time, beyond everything they'd thought was important when the story began. Singing of the journey home. The end. If this story touched your heart, moved you, or made you believe in the power of love and redemption, please hit that like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Did Drake and Megan's journey resonate with you? Have you ever had to choose between what's profitable and what's right? Your engagement helps stories like this reach more people who need to hear them. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of love, transformation, and second chances. Thank you for reading until the very end. Your time and attention mean everything.